Alright, so welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Watchmen graphic novel. I'm going to do this whole thing spoiler free, unless you don't want to see panels from the first chapter, but just close your eyes at that point or something. So my basic thoughts on this book are that it's one of the best things I've ever read. Comic books, real books, graphic novels, this one is up there with the best of the best. Watchmen is a masterpiece in every ounce of its being, and it weighs a few ounces. If you want to toss Watchmen in the trash because it's a comic book / graphic novel, I beg you to listen. If you don't read this book before you die, you are missing out on so much. The complexion of this story can really be explained in a couple of sentences. The cover and symbol of this book is a smiley face with a drop of blood on it. The smiley face represents everything simple about comics before this book. The good guys fought the bad guys and the good guys won. The drop of blood is the humanity, the affairs, the morally ambiguous choices required to move forward, the ethics, every flaw that crafts the complexion of life splattered onto the children's fantasies that were comic books. Watchmen changed all of that. Obviously now it's not out of the ordinary to have a dark comic book, but Alan Moore and Frank Miller changed the times. Frank Miller didn't write Watchmen, but he wrote other books that came out around the same time, such as The Dark Knight Returns. Alan Moore didn't just write Watchmen, but he also wrote The Killing Joke and V for Vendetta. These two writers pioneered the comic book genre into where it is today. But that's enough of them. The central focus of Watchmen is the characters. The plot really doesn't start to pick up until much later in the book, and that may sound like a problem initially, but it's not at all. The characters are so human, so perfectly accurate to how a regular person would act if they were a superhero. The ultra-realism of this book sucks you in from the first page, and the characters are so well written. The book has your attention from beginning to end. This book is often mistakenly called a masterpiece because of the darkness and grittiness, but that's not the reason why Watchmen is still talked about to this day. Along with these phenomenal characters, the book is packed full of symbolism. I thoroughly enjoyed the book the first time I read it, but I never realized how much symbolism there really is. I learned something new every time I watch a video on Watchmen, and it's crazy how Alan Moore so carefully crafted this thing so that it would be timeless. Another thing that makes this book fantastic is the artwork. In a lot of these books with great writing, I'm not the biggest fan of the art, but the art in this book is just as good as the story. This trade paperback I have here had the recoloring of Watchmen, and I've seen comparisons, and I actually prefer the recoloring. The palette, the pencils, the atmosphere, the small details from Alan Moore's end, everything is just so great. Now, obviously, the recoloring didn't change much because the original artwork was still phenomenal, but it just adds a few touches that I think they enhance the story more than it already was. So the actual trade paperback here is pretty big compared to a normal trade paperback. The paper quality is newspaper-like, but it really didn't matter at all because the story was so great. If you're wondering what's the best way to read this story, there are countless hardcovers, soft covers, and there's even an absolute edition. I would recommend getting a trade paperback on your first read just because it's hard to justify spending a large amount of money on an absolute of a story you haven't read. I would love to get the absolute sometime in the future because I love this so much, but I'm fine just owning it in this format. So that's really all I had to say. Words can't describe how much I love this book. If you haven't read it, I 100% recommend it to you, but it's not a light read. It's easy to get into and it draws you in, but it's not easily digestible. The book is formatted so that it actually has sections that go off from the main story, with full pages with just text, where you read books, reports, and interviews within this world. These are just as important to the story as the actual panels, and interconnected throughout this whole book is a comic within a comic. Don't get me wrong, you can understand the book while reading the book, but what I'm trying to get at is you'll need to give it deep thought to appreciate it. So those were my thoughts on Watchmen. If you have any questions, you can ask them in the comments. I don't usually advertise stuff like this, but join my Discord if you want to talk about anything, see memes or whatever. The link is in the description. That's all.